Hi, my name is Jennifer, and welcome back to my channel, and welcome to my May wrap-up. So we're going to keep it vlog style because I just find it much more manageable. So today is the 3rd of May, and yesterday I finished my first book, and that was The Gifts by Hyder. So this was recommended by Katie over at Books and Things, and I believe Katie actually worked on this book herself. She is mentioned in the acknowledgements at the end. This is historical fiction. It's set in London in 1840. There are rumours of a fallen angel in London, also known as the Angel of the Thames. So a rumoured mysterious creature with wings that people have sighted, but no one really knows what this creature is. We follow multiple perspectives, mostly a number of different female perspectives. We do get a male perspective from a surgeon who is keen to track down this angel in order to gain critical acclaim for being the first person to sort of make this scientific discovery. I won't say too much about the plot other than that. It is quite a long book. It's about 450 pages long, but it reads really quickly. The chapters are quite short. Each chapter is told from a different perspective. It's all third person narration. And so we get these different viewpoints of these people who are all in some way or another connected to this angel. Although there are a number of different characters, which sometimes I can find quite confusing, I never got confused at all with this. It was really easy to follow. It was really easy for me to remember who all the different characters were. And again, because the chapters are quite short, you're never too far away from coming back around to the same character again. This was a really pacey read. It was really interesting. It was just a really good time. It was thoroughly enjoyable. It was really quite a page turner. I was racing through it, particularly towards the end. I would highly recommend this if you are a fan of historical fiction. It was just thoroughly enjoyable. This is a debut adult novel, I believe. So Liz Hyder has written children's books before, but this is her debut adult novel, and I'll definitely be checking out whatever she writes next. Today is the 9th of May, and over the weekend I finished reading An Ordinary Wonder by Buki Papillon. So I read this on the recommendation of Scott from Gunpowder Fiction and Plot. Thank you to Scott because this was a great recommendation. So we follow Otolorin, who is a young Nigerian who is intersex. She is raised as a boy, but from a very young age realised that she is a girl. Her family don't acknowledge that she is a girl. The fact that she is intersex is seen to be a shameful thing. Right from when she was born, no doctor was ever allowed to be aware that she is intersex. So there's never been any sort of conversations with any medical profession at all. She lives with her mother and her twin sister. Her mother is, by all accounts, not a very nice person. She considers Otolorin to be some sort of abomination, mistake, evil almost, because of the fact that she is intersex. Otolorin has a twin sister as well, who the relationship between the two of them is quite a lovely relationship, and it's quite moving. I think her twin sister tries to be supportive of her, but at the same time, in trying to be supportive of her, doesn't want Otolorin to sort of step out of line or do things that's going to make the mother angry or cause problems within the family. So it's quite a complex relationship, but a really interesting relationship between the two twin sisters. The book is told in two different timelines. So we have 1989 when Otolorin is 12 years old, and 1991 when she is 14 years old. So I'm using she, her pronouns when I'm talking about her, but no one in Otolorin's life sees her as a girl, only herself. So in the second timeline, when she's 14 years old, we see her away at boarding school in Nigeria. And Otolorin has to go to boarding school because she sees it as her way out. And I'll just read this quote. It says, "Study like mad and earn that scholarship to America where they'll know what to do about my body before the worst happens and it's too late and I'm forever stuck the wrong way." So she sees going to boarding school as a way to be able to get good grades, to hopefully get a scholarship to a university in America, and she hopes that if she can get to America, they'll be able to help her out medically, to provide support so that she doesn't, because obviously she is fearful of like growing facial hair and things like that, and because she's never spoken to any medical professional at all about being intersex, she doesn't know about her body, and she doesn't know if she's all of a sudden going to start menstruating. She doesn't know if she's able to get pregnant. Like, she just doesn't know, because there's been no avenue open to her to be able to have those conversations with anyone. Her family, her mother, has very much hidden all that away. It's something to be ashamed of. So Otter Lauren sees boarding school as her way out. So we do get these two timelines. I will say I'm not sure that having two timelines added anything for me. Partway through the story, the two timelines sort of catch up with each other, and we just get one normal chronological narrative, which I think I preferred. And we see the difficulties that Otter Lauren faces at boarding school. She attends boarding school presenting as a boy, and people treat it as a boy, but nevertheless she is perceived as being different in some way by some of the other pupils at the boarding school. So we do see her face bullying, there is violence, there is sexual violence, and there are some scenes within the book that I found quite difficult to read. The heart of this book, this is really about Otter Lauren sort of discovering for herself her own identity and realising for herself that her body is not shameful. We see the friendships that she does develop at boarding school with people who can see her for her true self. Overall, I think this is really quite a moving story about, I guess it's a coming of age story really, about Otter Lauren coming to understand herself, her place in the world, and sort of moving away from the sort of restraints that her family, in particular her mother, has placed on her. I will say that towards the end of the story, everything kind of wraps up very conveniently, in terms of, it was almost like the author didn't want there to be any loose threads at all, and everyone's backstory had to be completely explained, and every character's motivations and everything. So that was just like a little bit too much tied up with a little bow on, maybe, for me. But that's a very minor quibble. Because I do think this is a really lovely story, actually, and a really important story. I'm not sure I've read a book featuring a main character who's intersex before. And I thought this was great. I thought it was well written, good character development, and a really moving story. So it is a book that I would highly, highly recommend. Today is the 11th of May, and I finished reading Revolutionary Road by Richard Yates. So I read this for my reading group at the library. This one was my choice, actually. With our reading group, we are restricted by what books the library has reading sets of. But I wanted to read this one for a while, and I've owned this copy myself for a few years. I have seen the film a number of years ago, the film starring Kate Winslet and Leonardo DiCaprio, although I didn't remember all that much detail about the film before going into the book. So it's set in 1950s in America, and we have a young married couple called Frank and Alice Wheeler. They're both around 30 years old. They have two young children. They live in the suburbs of Connecticut, and to all appearances they have a good life. They're living the American dream. Frank works in, I think he works in New York. Is Connecticut to New York like a commutable journey? My American geography isn't very good, but I think that's what he does. I think he commutes to work in Manhattan. And he has a job at some big company. It might be like an engineering company. It's like an office job, and which he doesn't enjoy. He has no motivation. He just, it earns him money. I'm not sure that he really knows what his job is. We get descriptions of him in his office, sort of like pushing around pieces of paper and writing little notes and sending the paper off to secretaries, and eventually they come back to him and he'll hide them in a drawer and all of this. So he's not enjoying his job. We see Frank and Alice's life, their relationship, and it all seems quite hollow. They don't even really seem to like each other very much. There is another couple, another married couple who they are good friends with, who they, go to dinner with and so on. And Frank and Alice sort of laugh between each other about this couple, even though they are their friends, because they just see this couple as living this very suburban lifestyle, and they just seem to be just so pleased with their lot. But Frank and Alice sort of look down on them. But then they come to realise that actually their own lives are very, very similar to the lives of their friends, who they are looking down on. They come to realise that there is a hollowness about their life. And then we see them sort of come up with a plan as to how they might escape suburbia, how they might change their life for the better. And we see how that plays out. I love this book. It doesn't sound like a lot when I'm describing it. I know it doesn't sound terribly interesting, but it's really well written. The characters are very well developed. They are, for the most part, fairly unlikable characters, I will say. And in particular, Frank, who we get Frank's perspective for most of the book. So it's all told in third person. And we do get perspectives from some of the other characters throughout, but it is mostly from Frank's perspective. He's generally quite an unlikable character. He has pretty poor attitudes towards women. He's not like a totally evil character, but he's just like your average, not very nice person. And I think that's kind of the point. Frank and Alice could sort of be any random married couple, sort of going through this just general low level miserable life, basically. I found this to be really quite a compelling read. I got through it quite quickly. I thought it was very enjoyable. There are some aspects of it which are kind of, not funny, but sort of wryly funny, just a little bit, which I thought was well good. I think this is Richard Yates' debut novel, I think I read. And it's excellent, and my library does have a few more books by him which I would be very keen to check out. I can imagine not everyone getting on with this book because of the fact that the characters are pretty unlikable, and there is plot. It's not like it's plotless, but it is just a focus on their life, their marriage, their sort of humdrum existence, which I very much enjoyed. It was weird as I was reading this because I had a weird sense that I've read it before, and I know I've seen the film many years ago, but I feel like I have read this book before. I don't know whether it's just that the film is so similar, but it's strange, but I can't find a record that I have read it before. So maybe it's just that I've seen the film. I don't know. I'd be interested to watch the film again, actually, and compare it. But no, very much enjoyed it. Highly recommend. Today is Friday the 13th, and a couple of days ago I finished reading Sorrow and Bliss by Meg Mason. Now I have done a individual book review video of this book, which I will link down below. So if you want to hear my full thoughts, then check out that video. But briefly, so I read this because it is on the Women's Prize shortlist. I did DNF it originally a couple of months ago, but I wanted to give it another go. and I very much liked it. So it's about Martha, who is about to turn 40, and at the start of the book her husband Patrick leaves her and she ends up moving back in with her parents. Martha struggles with her mental health and has done for a very, very long time. We see how she has sort of collected diagnoses from the numerous doctors that she's seen over the years who've given her various prescriptions for different medication and nothing's quite worked. So we see her sort of struggling to I guess understand her own identity. You know, she's on the brink of turning 40, living back with her parents, her husband's left her, she's struggling with her mental health. What the book does really cleverly, I think, is it balances humour so well with looking at more serious themes. It is really quite a funny book throughout. It did make me laugh out loud, it also made me cry. I can imagine people not getting on with the humour in here, but I do think humour is very, very personal. But for me, it really worked. I think the book does really well is it's not a book about a specific mental illness. It doesn't, you know, it focuses more on the impact of mental illness on the individual, on their identity, and on their relationships, and on the impact that has on those around them. And I think it does that very well. I am very pleased I did head back and read it. I think it's very good. As I say, it did make me cry, which doesn't happen that often. I had quite a personal reaction to the book. I mean, what is reading if not a personal reaction to a book? But yeah, I did. It felt like a gut punch at on a couple of occasions, at various points in the story. But I very much enjoyed it. I would highly recommend it. Yeah, I think it's great. Hello, today is Saturday the 21st of May and I haven't updated you for a while and I've got 5 books to talk about. So first up is The Oxford Murders by Guillermo Martinez, who is an Argentinian author. This is translated by Sonia Soto. So this is a crime mystery novel. Our main character is an Argentinian mathematician who comes over to Oxford University and becomes embroiled in a series of murders. So the victims, near to their bodies, there is some sort of symbol next to each of them, and the investigators are trying to figure out what links the symbols, what the next in the sequence is going to be, and therefore who the next victim will be. So that sort of puzzle aspect of the novel was, I think, the most interesting part of it for me. The book is really quite male-gazy from our main character's perspective, which wasn't great. It was very, very short, so, you know, I got to the end and it was vaguely interesting, but it's not a book that I would particularly recommend. Next I read Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. This was a buddy read with the lovely Gemma from Gemma Books and Becky from Teacup the Storyteller. And I really like this. I've never read this before. It's a book that a lot of people I think read at school, but I never did. Our 2 main characters are called George and Lenny, and they are sort of drifters looking for work. They find work at this ranch, and the book is really about their experience and the people that they meet at the ranch. The relationship between George and Lenny I think is really interesting. George very much looks out for Lenny and looks after him. Lenny is very childlike and he sort of inadvertently gets himself into trouble. Lenny has this dream that him and George will make enough money hopefully one day to go live on a farm, surrounded by rabbits. And yeah, I really liked it. I won't say too much because it's very, very short. There was aspects of the book which did surprise me in terms of some of the stuff that happens towards the end of the book. I wasn't expecting, and I thought was really, really interesting. And I really enjoyed buddy reading this with Gemma and Becky. Next, I read Love Radio by Ebony LaDelle. This is a YA romance which is recently released. Our two main characters are called Danielle and Prince. They're both in their final year of high school. Prince is a radio DJ, and part of his radio show is that he gives relationship advice. So when he meets Danny, he asks her to allow him to have 3 dates with him, by the end of which he will make her fall in love with him. Which in itself is kind of slightly problematic, I feel. But that aside, I really enjoyed it. It looks at a lot of different sort of themes of race, of chronic illness, being a young carer, sexual assault, cultural appropriation. It was also quite funny in parts. I'm very aware that I am not the target audience for this book. However, I thought it was a good read. I very much enjoyed it. Next up, I read The Bread the Devil Knead by Lisa Allen-Agostini. This is on the Women's Prize shortlist. It's set in Trinidad, and our main character, Alethea, is in an abusive relationship. And we see how she sort of struggles to come to realise that, and the people around her will see bruises on her and tell her she should leave, but we see the difficulty that she finds in actually leaving her partner. It is quite a difficult book to read because of the content. We also get sort of flashbacks to Alethea's childhood and the trauma and abuse that she experienced during her childhood. I, for some reason, struggled to connect to this story, and I found like I had to push myself through it, and I'm not entirely sure why, because I don't think it's a bad book at all. I don't have any sort of specific criticism of it. I just struggled to connect. I liked the narrative voice. So in particular, the chapters directly from Alethea's point of view in the present day are told in Trinidadian Creole, and sort of the voice sort of sings from the page. I very much like that. I think maybe it was because of the content, because it was so difficult to read, maybe that put me off, but then that's not necessarily always an issue for me, because I'm thinking of something like Animal by Lisa Taddeo, which I absolutely loved, and has some very difficult themes as well. So I don't know, most people really like this book. I think maybe for some reason it just wasn't quite for me, but I think it's good to see it on the Women's Prize shortlist. This is a book which, from what I've heard, not many people had heard of before it made the long list. I certainly hadn't heard of it before, so I think it's good that the novel is getting obviously a lot more attention now that it's on the shortlist. I think it's worth a read. Check out trigger warnings. Obviously it is quite difficult to handle in parts, I think. I think it is doing some interesting stuff, even though it didn't quite work for me. And then I read The Case of the Constant Suicides by John Dickson Carr. So this is a murder mystery novel. I very much enjoy John Dickson Carr's work. And this has an interesting setup. So the patriarch of a family has died, and his sort of distant relatives are all gathering at this castle in the Scottish Highlands where he lived. And what's happened is he has been pushed from the top of a tower of the castle. He was sleeping in a room at the top of the tower. It was locked, and there is sort of a question mark over what happened, the nature of his death. He has insurance policies, but if his death is found to be suicide, the insurance policies won't pay out to his relatives. The nature of his death as well, in terms of the room where he was sleeping, there are some sort of unusual elements within that which sort of don't seem to make sense. John Dickson Carr is very good at locked room mysteries and sort of impossible puzzles. So I thought this was a really interesting setup and an enjoyable read. Hello, so it's now the end of May and I have 4 more books to wrap up. So first is Sweetpea by CJ Skuse. This is a book that I got in my advent calendar last year. It's actually the first book I've got to reading from my advent calendar, even though we're almost in June. I'll link below to my advent calendar unboxing if you want to check that out. So I'd never heard of this book before, but a couple of people mentioned that they had heard of it. Apparently it's quite big on BookTube a few years ago. This was a wild ride. This book is crazy. I quite enjoyed it. It's about a young woman called Rhiannon, and she might seem like the average girl next door, but she's got a killer secret. By day, her job at a newspaper is demeaning and unsatisfying. By evening, she dutifully listens to her friends' wedding plans while secretly making a list. A kill list. So this book is told from the perspective of Rhiannon. Most of the chapters start with her listing the people who she would like to kill. So it might be, for example, the guy on the checkout who squished her bread as he was scanning it, to, you know, people that she knows in her real life. It's a very funny book, quite darkly funny. I'd say it's quite vulgar as well. That was the word that sprang to mind as I was reading it, because the stuff that she like comes out with, or her thoughts, yeah, it's a lot. I did think it was funny. There was parts where I was kind of laughing and thinking, is it okay to laugh at this? It's honestly, it's wild. It reminds me a little bit of You by Caroline Kepnes, just in terms of that sort of like unlikable narrator, but they're also kind of a little bit likable, but you know you shouldn't really like them. Yeah, it was this was a crazy book. This is the first in a trilogy. I hadn't realised. I thought there was only two, but it's actually a trilogy. My library has the second one, not the third one. I think I might quite like to continue on in the series when I'm in the mood for this kind of thing. But yeah, it was very enjoyable. Next is a reread. So this is The Behaviour of Moths by Poppy Adams. I read this several years ago and I absolutely loved it, and I've never, I don't think, heard anyone else talk about it. It's from 2008. I've never heard anyone talk about it. I've never even seen it in a bookshop or anything. But it's fabulous. So this follows two sisters. The sisters are both elderly. They're maybe at least in their 70s. We have Ginny, who is still living in the family home, like a big old home, and she is a lepidopterist, so she studies moths. This is something that she has sort of inherited from her father, who was a lepidopterist himself. She's very reclusive, she hardly ever leaves the house, and her sister Vivian comes to stay with her. They have been estranged for, I think, over 40 years. So she comes to stay, and it's really about the relationship between the two sisters, and we get the backstory of them growing up, with their relationships with their mother and father, and there's various sort of family secrets that come out. It's quite a gothic novel in tone, I would say. There is quite a lot about moths in here, obviously, because Ginny is a lepidopterist. But it's really, really interesting, I think. And I'm not like into moths. But I think it's fascinating. And obviously there are some like metaphors going on in there. It reminds me a little bit of The 13th Tale by Diane Setterfield. I just feel like it's got a similar tone to it. And I noticed on Storygraph, someone's left a review and they have noted the same thing as well. So maybe you might want to check it out if you do like The 13th Tale. I just think this is a really interesting book. It's quite tight focused. You're very much in the mind of Ginny as the main character, and sort of her past, her relationships, her motivations, and yeah, I think it's a really great book. Next, I read this tiny little book. This is The Victim by P.D. James. This is a short story, but it's published on its own. I just saw it in the library and thought I would give it a go. It's a Faber book. I think Faber have published a load of short stories, like individually. This story is about a man and his plan for revenge. And I very much enjoyed it. I won't say more than that because it is super short. It's like 30 pages long. And then the final book that I read in May is The Blue Bedspread by Kamal. This was a random library pick. I just saw it on the display at the front of the library. I've never heard of the book before, and I had never heard of the author before. It was originally published in 1999 and has just recently been published in this edition. This, I don't even know how I'm going to talk about this book. Let me read you what it says on the blurb. Okay, so, in a house on a Calcutta street lit by the half-light of a yellow street lamp lies a baby, 1 day old, wrapped in its hospital towel. In the next room sits a man all alone, writing. Who is this man, at once frightened and determined? What is he writing? Where has the baby come from, and where will it go? Tonight these questions will be answered when the man unravels the dark secrets he has carried all his life. This book is very strange, but I think I liked it. It's very easy to read, but I don't think it's that easy to understand, which is why I'm going to find it difficult to talk about. So, the central sort of idea is we do have this man and this baby in this room in Calcutta, and we get the man sort of telling stories to the baby, and we find out about the past of these characters, the connections between the two of them, their family background, how they've come to be here. It's quite strange, and we get sort of like offshoots of sort of different storylines surrounding the central characters, and I don't think I always entirely understood the connections between the stories. It's quite shocking and very dark, and I wasn't expecting the way that it went at all. There was, I think, 3 moments where I was like, what the hell? So do check out trigger warnings online. There's trigger warnings on Storygraph if you're going to be reading this book. It's good. Like, it's a really well written book. I will say it's a really well written book. It is very accessibly written as well. If rather strange. And it wasn't until I'd finished reading it, when I looked it up online, that I realised it's one of the 70 books chosen for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. So I think it's the BBC Arts thing. They've chosen 70 books, 10 for each decade that the Queen's been on the throne, and this is one of the picks for the 90s. So that's really interesting. Interesting that is one of those books. There was a quote that I wanted to read which kind of says a lot about the book, I think. This is from Cormac Kinsella from the Irish Times. It says, "A powerful, haunting and sometimes shocking novel that deserves to be read at one sitting and then reread." And I think that sums it up quite well. I didn't read it in one sitting, I read it over maybe like 2 days, but it is a book that I think benefits from reading it fairly quickly, and it is the kind of book where you finish it and you're a bit like, what did I just read? So I would recommend it. Please do let me know if you've read it, because I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. As I say, it's not a book I'd heard of before, but I'm glad I picked it up. Yeah. So those are the books that I read in May. Let me know if you've read any of those books, what you thought of them. Let me know what the best book you read in May was. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye.